Hello, and welcome to my tutorial for animating still images. In this project, we will be learning how to use the parallax and the puppet tool. We'll be using these two images, but you can use whatever images that you find. For starters, we're going to use the parallax, where I load my picture into the timeline, and then I refit the image to fit my my window here. So if you need to, you would be going over to fitting, making sure it fits, and then right click, transform, fit to comp. You can change the width or the height if that's the specifics. Next, we're going to duplicate this layer with Control D or Command D, and then we're going to name them. I named mine subject, and then the bottom one is background, but you can name yours however you like, such as foreground instead of subject. Once you're done with that, make your subject layer invisible. Then click the background, make sure it's selected, then grab your pen tool. Draw around the pen with the pen tool around the subject. It doesn't need to be precise. Basically what we're doing is we're cutting a hole in this background layer because we're going to get rid of this lantern. The lantern will be moving on its own, but we need to see what's behind it. So once you do that, you're going to make sure that your background is still selected. Go to masks, and you want to subtract, because we want the lantern to disappear, not the background. Then you're going to go to your Content Aware Fill panel. If you do not find this, you can go to Window and it will be right there. Once you find it, adjust the alpha expansion to 5 or 6, roughly. Oops, I accidentally made a shape here. That's not my intention. Again, just be careful and slow down, obviously. Again, make sure your background is selected. And then you're going to fill in that hole. Adjusting it can change the tonality of it. I'm not 100% sure per se, but from what I've gathered, it's just 5 or 6. And then you're ready to go to Generate Fill Layer. But first you want to make sure that your timeline is at the beginning of, your playhead's at the very beginning of your timeline. Press the N key, because then you'll make one frame, and then Generate Fill Layer. This will create its own little fill layer, which you're going to stretch, and as you can see, it blocked up that hole, blending in with our background. Now you are going to try to put the fill and the background in a pre-comp folder. So again, move the fill layer down to the background so that way it doesn't highlight the subject, and then pre-compose. But before you also do that, please be sure to stretch your fill layer all the way across your timeline so it fills up all the space. Otherwise, it's going to be a small section and then it's going to look a little weird. But now as we can see, the whole thing is now covered up. Next, we're going to move to animating our lantern. This is where the magic happens. You're going to turn your subject layer or foreground layer back on. And then, with the subject or foreground layer highlighted, use your pen tool and draw around your subject. Be precise as you can, because again, we want to make sure we just move the subject, not half of the background, because that's going to be weird. And depending on your image, obviously, it can be more difficult. You don't need to use the images that I'll be providing in a folder in the description. You can find your own images. However, for starters, I would recommend with a simplistic background, so that way it is more able to, for the generate fill layer, the content aware fill, to create a proper clone or stamp of what's going on. The content aware fill panel is similar to like the clone healing brush or the stamp tool in Photoshop. So again, take your time, go around. As you can see, I'm taking my sweet time on this because I want to make sure I get it right. So then once you have it highlighted, you're now going to go to keyframes. So you're going to go down, transform, and for me, I'm going to move my playhead right to the center of the timeline because this is where I want the lantern to be, or at the end of it, because this is where I want the lantern to be when it finishes moving. I want it to be at this exact position. Now again, depending on the picture you're using, this can be different. You can move your have your end of animation point be wherever you want. So I put mine right about there. And then with the position and the scales, I'm going to push down that watch to place a keyframe down. Now again, you may not need to scale or position, but it just depends, like I said, on our subject. So I put my keyframes down. I'm now going to move my playhead down a little bit, and then I'm going to play around with the positioning of it. Now, forgive me as I try to figure out which would do. There we go. There's my direction. So you can just drag the numbers and go that way, or you can grab that single crosshair in the middle of the subject that's at the bottom of that straight line and move it to anywhere you would like. So for me, I want this lantern to go from below up to where it was originally. And scale-wise, I'm not messing with it on the lantern per se, because I like it just the way it is. So I play it back quite a few times. And yeah, just play it back. Just keep going at it. This is where you'll have your own creative mind. Do what you want to do. Yes, there we go. Yeah, I decided to shift it because I realized that my timeline was too long, which we are going to fix that in just a moment. Now you're going to do the same thing. Unfortunately, for some odd reason, I did not capture this segment of me tweaking with the background, but I did the same thing with the background layer by putting keyframes for the position and the scale. So when you see later on in the final product, the smaller lanterns on the screen are going to be disappeared, forgive me, and the small lanterns will be missing. And they will be coming into view later because I zoomed in the background image and then to pull back. So you will do the same thing. Just animate your background and your subjects layers separately, with being sure to put keyframes for position and scale. Once you are proud of what you have animated, you are then able to adjust your timeline to the correct composition settings that you want. Again, I'm shortening it down. I started with 10, but I can change it no matter what. Again, just go to your comp, right click, and go to composition settings to adjust it accordingly. I feel like this image is missing something. I know what we can do. Let's add some snow. Let's really bring this picture to life. So we're going to create a new solid, and we're going to name it Snowfall. And then hit OK. Now we're going to go over to our effects panel, and we're going to type in the word snowfall. It'll be under simulation. So type in snowfall, and then drag it over and put it on your layer. Now, as you can see, it's all black. We're not going to see anything, but we'll get to that in a moment. So you're going to want to do this. You're going to be going up to these settings and change them to the following. Your flakes set to 1000. Your size is 15. Leave the variation size alone. Change the scene depth to 5000. Speed is 500. And then the variation speed is 50. And then the color, obviously, we want it as white as snow can be. You can also use this effect as ash. So if you want to animate a volcano erupting of some sort and you want to give it ash, you can use this effect. Opacity we're going to tweak in just a moment. To add it to the layer, you're going to uncheck that composite with original because we want to be able to see the layer. So now your snow is on top and you can see the lantern images below. Now you want to mess with the influence. The lower the number is, the brighter your snow is going to be. So if you set it to 100%, it's obviously going to be very dull snow. So we want it to be bright white snow, so we set that influence to 0. Your spread width is 150, and your spread height is just 50. Okay, so we're going to go to 80 opacity. Now let's take a look. There we go. That's turning out real great. So again, if you have like a snowy image and you want it to be brought to life, you can just throw that effect on and it makes it look very cozy. So now we're going to export it out. Go to File, Export, and then you're going to send it to the render queue, which I already did in this. So here you're going to make sure you give it a name. I set it as an AVI file. Name it, be sure it's going into the right section you're wanting to save to. And then for best settings, you want to change the duration of your export, because if you export it as is, you're only going to get the very first frame that we used for that generate fill. So if you want the full animation timeline, change your duration. For me, I set it to about 3 seconds. So you can see the whole animation go. Because again, you want the whole thing, not just one frame. Hence why you see a second one down below. And then you hit render and let it do its magic. So again, be sure you go into the render settings, change the duration of your timeline for that so it exports to the exact time frame you want. And here is the last results. Now we will move on to the next image, which is animating smoke. So I took this baby picture here, and we duplicated the layer like before. And now we are going to use the puppet pen tool. This can be used to help animate other forms. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on that, select the layer, which is our top one, and you're just going to start putting pins down. Just pin up. Now, the more pins you have, obviously, the more control you're going to need for animating them. However, you want to make sure they are spaced out, not too far, but not too close. These pins are what is going to be tugging and pulling the picture into the direction wherever you want it to go. This can also be used for animating the arms, legs, heads of any subject you want to do. If you ever did like preschool or kindergarten crafts where you had like a skeleton and you had to use those push tacks that you could bend and then they could move their arms around, this is literally the same thing. So over time, as you see, I'm going to be tweaking things up a little bit. For starters, I did do something in the video that I fixed later off screen, unfortunately. The very bottom row of pins that you see, you want to keep those alone. Do not move them to any particular position because it's going to warp the bottom of that picture. We want the bottom of our picture to stay put because we want the smoke to be like it is coming up from the ground. And so I'm just placing pins around to where I think the smoke is going to be moving. Because again, I want the smoke to go up is my general goal. And if you need to erase any of the pins, just go under that mesh tab and find the pin, and then you can always delete it. So now we're going to place our playhead at the very beginning, and we're going to place it at the very end. Because I'm getting ready to animate the pins. So once you've placed them down, move your playhead all the way to the very end of the timeline and start grabbing those pins and pulling in the direction you want to go. Again, not too far, but not too close either. But as you can see, it's starting to warp. Go in any direction that you believe feels natural. There, as you can see, I decided to drag that, but eventually off screen, I removed that. So once again, do not move the pins at the very bottom of your image or wherever the direction the smoke is coming from. Keep those pins there. But as you can see, also as we're pulling, the woman is starting to get pulled around. And also we're now starting to see that bottom layer, but we're going to fix that with another layer and a mask in just a moment. Now, I will say I was a little bit ambitious by going with this image, but unfortunately this was one of the few pictures that came out clearly, also that would load properly. It would sometimes my computer acted like I was had a duplicate picture when in reality it was a different one altogether. So again, this is just an image I have. You can use any image of smoke you want. You can even use a volcano as well. And as I mentioned with the snowfall effect, you can make it look like ashes falling from the sky. So once we've moved and animated all of our pins, you're not going to take a snapshot. I just moved my mouse around. You're going to be creating a mask now so we can cover up the bottom part, and not to mention stop having her shaped in such a way. So your bottom layer that you did not put the pen tools on, you're going to duplicate that and drag it all the way to the top. Then you're going to, I changed the color just so that way it makes it easier for me. You can do the same thing with your other types of layers as well in any of your projects. Change it to a color that it's going to be suited for you. So this top layer with the mask, I'm going to change the color. And then with it selected, oh, actually I changed my other ones too. I'm like, you know what? Let's change these up. Okay, there. Now I can kind of tell it better. I could also you can also rename yours as well. But what you're going to do now is you're going to make that mask by clicking on that layer and then use the pen tool, and we're going to go around our subject. So we want to keep this beautiful woman proud to have a baby that is she's finally been blessed to bring into the world. And so we're going to go around her as best we can, try to be as close as possible first. We're going to tweak the mask in a little bit. So this mask is going to be made so that everything outside of her outline is going to be gone, and it will be the layer below it, while she is perfectly still and not being stretched in any way possible. And you're also going to extend it around the rest of because again, we want to finish our mask all together, so that will include going out of line. Okay, once you have made that mask, but we're going to mask and invert, because again, we only want what's inside showing and what's behind it to be excluded. Now I'm going to tweak the mask up. Obviously, it's not going to be 100% perfect, so we're going to tweak it up a little bit. Okay, so I go to my mask. So if I want to hide any other warped distortion, I go to my feather, and I'm going to put it at mask feather at about 20, so it softens the edges a little bit more. You can also use the feather tool, which is underneath the pen tool, to stretch it out if need be. Because again, we're not perfect quite yet, but as you can see, as the picture is moving, her former self from the other layer is peeking out, and I don't want that, obviously. So that's when you're going to stretch that mask barrier around to incorporate her to not be seen, hence why you have the feather. This is the same thing with if you have smokes over buildings or any other image around you, you want to hide that. So the feather mask will help cover that up. Okay, so yes, I went back and I relabeled my stuff. So what I did off screen was I put those pins back at the very bottom and I did not animate those. And now, as you can see, it's a lot better. The smoke is rising up and the pin is at the bottom. And if you need to delete any of your pins, especially their movement, just go down to your animation layer, go to the mesh, and then you're going to go to the keyframes that are at the very end of your timeline. Go to the very end of your timeline and delete those puppet pins, keyframes, if you need to. Okay, letting it render, play out. It's slow, obviously. But now, in order to keep the smoke moving, we're going to loop the animation. But first, I'm also making sure that my mask is tweaked to my liking, so I stretch it out so that way you cannot see her behind it. And I also changed the mask feather to about 30, just to make it more softer. Again, it's all up to you and it's all depending on your image. Okay, so now we're going to animate a loop for this. So for that, you're going to go to the very center of your timeline to the best of your ability. And then on that timeline, you're going to go to right click, markers, add markers, or just use the number pad asterisk. This will help me indicate that this is the middle of my timeline. So you put this on the smoke animation layer. You're going to click on it, then Control D to duplicate it. And then you're going to press the T for the opacity. We're going to keep it at 100, move the timeline to the very beginning, set it to 0, then move your timeline all the way to the very end, and set that to 0. Now, you're going to take that layer that you just put the opacity on, duplicate that one, and now you're going to, whoops, no you're not. You're going to take that first one. Yeah, that's right. You take that layer before you duplicate it. You're going to move it all the way over to so that the middle marker hovers to the very end of the timeline, and that your very first marker keyframe is placed in the middle. Now you're going to take that layer that you have selected, duplicate it again, and then move it all the way over to the far left so that that marker is now on the very beginning of the timeline. And so your end of that clip will be over the middle. So now you have a loop. Yep, and I made sure the keyframes. So now we're going to play it over and let's see our results. Looks a little warped, but that is basically what we want to go for. It's continuing that loop animation. And you're basically done. So after we've done our few test cycles, once again, be sure to Control, Save, or File, Save. Or if you're using a Mac, Command, Save. Then you're going to go File, Export, Render Queue. Then I change it to AVI. Change any other settings you need to do. It's going to be all right for me. Okay, and now be sure you name the exported footage and make sure it's going in the correct spot. And save, and then you'll render it. Thank you, and I hope this tutorial was helpful in helping you animate your own still images. Again, take your time. Be sure you plan out what you want to do, and I hope that these tools will help you for your next future assignment.